Coming up this week on the Markcast. Well, welcome everyone. This week on the Markcast, it is time to play The Feud.
Well, welcome to Family Feud, everybody. I'm your man, Steve Harvey.
I am your host, Reed Johnson. We are talking who won the alt football feud this year, XFL or USFL. Stay tuned.
Name a number that most men exaggerate.
100.
100.
69?
Really exciting show this week. First and foremost, Andrew Buchholz back on the program from Awful Announcing. We are breaking down the USFL championship ratings, comparing them to last year, comparing them to the XFL. Lots of spreadsheets, lots of numbers. Should be fun.
To me, the big thing just with the USFL at the moment is it's the classic field of dreams. If you build it, they will come. Well, from my perspective, they've built it, but the audiences haven't come yet.
And then, as always, I have to bring back the professor, Andrew Murray, who won the football feud this year, the XFL or the USFL. What should the USFL be doing in its offseason? Who has the more challenging offseason, the XFL or the USFL? Wide-ranging conversation. Hope you enjoy.
I think it was a proof of concept that even though you have a lot of ambitions to save money and try to improve the longevity of your product, at the end of the day, you still need to put something out there that's going to draw people in. If you're talking about the level of football and the level of competition, maybe it was a little bit better this year, although the same team ended up winning anyways and ended up being crowned champion at the end of the season. So you can argue about how much parity there really was in this league. But as far as what was presented and what was expected to attract more people, I mean, it kind of flatlined, honestly.
And then from CFL on TSN, Dwayne Ford, CFL legend, coming on the program. We are previewing everything CFL Week 5. You don't want to miss it. Hope you guys enjoy, like, and subscribe. Hey guys, welcome to the Markcast. Reed here. Interesting episode this week, coming off the holiday week here. We had Canada Day, the long weekend for our Canadian folk. We've had the 4th of July, lots of weddings, everything else I've been filming in the interim. So we are here. Loaded show for you this week. Hope you enjoy. Like I said, off the top, kind of the football feud. This week, we finally wrapped. XFL wrapped its season, obviously USFL. Now we're kind of comparing the two. How did the USFL do? What do they need to do moving forward to next year? A very humble Daryl Moose Johnston in comparison to kind of the bombastic Fox Sports kind of approach they have for USFL marketing. Very interesting dichotomy there. We will get into all of that today. Like I said, Andrew Buchholz coming back on. A long-time promise here once the USFL kind of took over the alt football TV ratings, kind of comparing that, the declines year over year. What does Andrew kind of what does he attribute that to? What does he think the USFL should be doing moving forward? These acceptable ratings, lots of different things. Like I said, spreadsheets, numbers galore. I appreciate Jacob, one of our listeners, kind of compiling the list we use for all of that today. But kind of what do we do next year? USFL, I wouldn't say ascended into the end of season 2. I think they kind of maybe flatlined. You can look maybe a little down. So how do we do that moving forward? Lots of interesting conversations with Andrew. And then, like I said, Andy Murray coming back on, the professor, a long-ranging conversation, talking, I still maintain, USFL keeping the cities unnamed, awarding the franchises to their teams is different than kind of whatever hodgepodge model we're doing right now of relocating and revamping teams. But what does the USFL need to be doing moving into 2024? Great conversation with Andy. And then, like I said, Dwayne Ford, really appreciate it, making my life easy on a holiday weekend here where I have lots of work, coming on, long conversation, talking through all of the games. The Edmonton Elks, Saskatchewan game will be done by the time you're listening to this, but we talk about the Elks, kind of how they're looking at the quarterback dilemmas, and obviously Saskatchewan and everything else. Tyree Adams injured, or the injury notes released shortly after our conversation, so do keep that in mind. Talking with Dwayne, but obviously we expect Mazzoli to get the start this weekend for the Ottawa Red Blacks, so I really appreciate Dwayne taking the time to come on. That should do it for me today. We'll figure out everything next week. We are now in the XFL and USFL offseason, so stay tuned. Should be good coming forward. Well, we have back here today. I think we had promised this kind of mid-season, and now I think it makes more sense. Post-season recap here. We have Andrew Buchholz with Awful Announcing. Needless to say, a quiet day today on the Twitter universe in all football land. Not really. The USFL championship ratings coming out today. Andrew, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me back.
Good. So we're going to probably address this a lot. We have our spreadsheet here. Jacob A is a listener, kind of has tabulated all this. I know Greg Parks over at XFL Board kind of has his as well. I know Jacob just had put in a lot of work. Give him some credit on here. Kind of USFL championship ratings came out today, 1.157. NBC says it's 1.2 when you attribute in kind of the Peacock and streaming numbers, so we can get into that. Down, with the TV down 23.8% here, 1.52 on Fox last year, 1.57, and then we have the USFL ratings as a whole down 8.9%, including the playoffs year over year, and I have the XFL stuff on there as well. Andrew, initial thoughts here. What do you make of all of this?
Yeah, so I think it's certainly disappointing for the USFL that they weren't really able to build on season one. I think a lot of the talk that they've had about this from the Fox executives who run it in particular has been, this is a slow build, but we're building. We're building every year. It's going to make sense 5 years down the road when we sell these teams to local people and whatever. And so I think it's very disappointing for them to see a notable drop from the first year in the championship game ratings. And that also just follows the trend we've seen all season long of the ratings have not been what they were last year. Some of that's about XFL competition. Some of that's about some other factors that have gone on. But I don't think this season went the way the USFL was hoping. And I think an interesting thing there, too, is even like you look at their comments on it. You look at Daryl Johnston talking about this before the championship game and how he's surprised that the ratings have been so bad. So that suggests to me that this wasn't expected internally at all.
Well, and we'll get into that because I do want to do a deep dive in Ben Fisher. I reached out to him and he basically just said he thought the article spoke for himself. He just didn't have anything to add because I certainly invited Ben on as well just to kind of share his thoughts if he had any other, added, kind of added insights. We'll get into that, but that's kind of what killed me going into this championship game because Daryl came out. They were doing the big media day. We were doing just our regular pregame stream last Friday. Obviously, Ben's article comes out, Daryl and all of that. And I got a lot of like, well, why are you guys pushing the narrative right now? I'm like, this isn't any, this is the storyline. I don't think I would want that to be my storyline going into the championship game. But we'll get into that overall. And just to point out, so this season average USFL ratings per game 631,232. XFL was 634,000 on average if you do it across all the things. Basically a dead heat, and you'll see outlets put that out, right? Like finish it, whatever. XFL 8 network games over the air compared to the USFL's 26. Plus you got obviously NBC and Fox. Super Bowl ads, real football ads, not Hollywood knockoff ads. What do you make with the changes that the USFL made this season to basically break dead even with the XFL and kind of their first outing?
Yeah, so I think that the USFL was more impacted by the XFL than they thought they were going to be. And it's interesting because these two leagues don't really go head to head that much, right? They have different seasons. They've got a little bit of overlap, but they're largely playing at different times. I think what's sort of interesting here is you mentioned the greater network broadcast games advantage the USFL had, and they still are in this dead heat with the XFL. And the XFL in particular, we talked about last time I was here, but they had the real bad thing of having a lot of their games on FX, which has okay distribution, but it's where no one who is a sports fan is just going to FX. So I think the USFL has a lot of advantages. In particular, they have actual ownership by a broadcaster. They're owned by Fox Sports, who has so much more skin in the game than Disney does with the XFL. And there's all these things. They're seemingly in their favor. They're in year two. They're building on this property. They even sorted out the thing in the offseason about the trademarks to other teams and so on. So there's a lot that seem to be looking up for them, and yet year 2 seems like a step back on the TV front to me, from a ratings perspective, not from a quality of the broadcast perspective.
Yeah, and I mean, and to be fair, yes, I thought USFL this year we had much more parity in the the teams, and we had lots of jokes about the losing records making it into the playoffs. We had a lot of that with the XFL. On a side note here, obviously ESPN going through continuing layoffs here. I just wanted to get your thoughts because obviously I've seen comments. Oh my gosh, ESPN, the world's falling. You know, they're trying to shed all this. Do you think that has any effect? I mean, are these different sections in the same pot of cash, or any impact you think at all of their investment in kind of other properties moving forward?
I don't think so, and I think especially because this isn't something they'd actually invested in. If this was similar to the Fox USFL situation, I think you'd get a lot of commentary on that. I mean, and like people are going to make the links regardless, right? Like this week alone, we had stories on people complaining at Pat McAfee, people complaining at Stephen A. Smith about other people being laid off. And that's not really what's going on. It's not that the money assigned to them is what's causing the layoffs with other people. It's content decisions. But that gets even further afield when you go from studio and on-air personality salaries to game rights and game broadcasting. There isn't, I don't think there's really a connection there at all. I think the only thing to keep in mind there is that this is not a free spending era of ESPN and Disney anymore. And in particular, with ESPN now being broken out into its own division, they have a lot more incentive than before to make sure everything they do either is profitable or has the hope of being profitable in future. So that's a thing for them to consider going forward, but I don't think these particular layoffs impact their XFL business whatsoever.
Another question, and then we'll keep going. I got mine. These are just popping up. We had on the stream last week, and John Vogel and I talked a lot, and if people missed our pregame USFL stream, you can check that out. But, you know, kind of NBC here, are they going to exercise being in the third year with Fox? You know, is this exciting enough? Obviously, they held the championship game this year. It's kind of ping-ponging back and forth. Any thoughts if you're NBC here? Because we obviously talk a lot from Fox because they have the ownership, but, you know, NBC is paying, you know, I think it was the quote was a significant rights fee. I think when the deal came out, I think they had quoted, I can't remember if that was Ben Fisher, one of our other analysts, but a significant fee. Any thoughts for your NBC here moving forward into year 3?
Yeah, I think to me, that's maybe the most interesting part of all of this going forward. So, and NBC, in some ways, they're sort of representing a middle approach between what Fox is doing and what ESPN is doing. ESPN is there saying, okay, we're broadcasting the XFL. We're doing this across our networks. That's fine. Fox is saying, we own this league. We own the USFL. We're going to build it into a thing. And then NBC has been, yeah, okay, we'll work with Fox. We don't own this league, but we think it's worthwhile enough to broadcast. And so to me, the most interesting thing that came out after year 1 of the USFL was the quotes of Ben Fisher, who you talked about earlier, the quotes he got from John Miller of NBC last June. And Miller was talking about, was quite happy with it, saying things like, it did what we hoped it would do. We're excited to begin planning to talk about 2023. So I'm interested to see if that tone from NBC changes at all after this year. Like I said earlier, I think this year is a step back for the USFL, certainly on the ratings front. I think it's a very clear indication that this is just not it's not just unchecked upward momentum. It's not just this league that's going to keep growing and become a thing with no opposition, no setbacks, whatever. It could perhaps take off and turn into a much bigger thing. But I think this season shows that's not preordained, that there's a lot of ways in which that doesn't happen. And so I'm very curious how NBC is going to feel about that after this season.
And that goes for both leagues, because we as fans sit here a lot and go, okay, well, if you know, XFL, if they marketed more and they spent more time in their markets and they did events and they, you know, if The Rock was doing more things and if maybe we had Russ Brandon and making more, and that, you know, kind of there's things that people say with the USFL, like, Well, all they got to do is once they get to more markets and once they do this and once they do that, like there's always these checklist items. But I do think it's showing, like you've said before on here, it was either, I think your second appearance, there is a finite ceiling right now for the number of people that are going to watch this. And just to make sure I say this on here, so Mike Mitchell had come out in his tweet today talking about the 1.2 million with the Peacock. Bill Shea commented on that. Bill's been on the show a bunch. Bill, unfortunately, was part of the layoffs over at Athletic. I hope he lands on his feet. He was retweeting, his own take on the numbers and talking about how the viewership was down 300,000 this year for the USFL. So I asked him, well, what do you attribute that to? And he tweeted me back, said, viewer fatigue, novelty has worn off, still building team players, team league affinity, two very similar competing leagues, a long holiday weekend with nice weather in many places. I think the total is within the expected range from his point of view. Do you think that 1.157 to 1.2 million is within the expected range for the USFL?
Yeah. Well, first off, you brought up Bill there, and I think he's an excellent writer. Sorry to hear that he got hit by those layoffs, and he absolutely should have a good spot soon, hopefully. I think his point there is absolutely fair. I think this is not a disaster. Drawing over 1 million is still a good thing, and especially when you bring in those elements what you mentioned of the long weekend and the other things going on. As we noted in our post on the championship game ratings today, this was the second most watched sporting event on Saturday, behind only the MLB on Fox. So that's not bad. And when there's not a lot of people watching stuff and watching sports in general, that's fine. I think it's still absolutely fair to have some disappointment about this and to be like, and especially for your championship game, that it takes a big dive from year one to year two. But the other thing that's interesting here, and you brought up Ben Fisher's Sports Business Journal article with Daryl Johnston, and I think the other really interesting side of that. So in that article, Daryl Johnston is talking about he's surprised on some levels that their broadcasts aren't drawing more viewers. He's talking about how great the broadcast quality is and the production quality is and so on. He's not really doing a whole lot of talk about how great the on-field product is, and I think that was an interesting omission. But even beyond that, he made some comments he made some comments about their hub model and the way that this year they had teams in 3 out of their 8 markets. They played in 4 locations, but one of those is one that does not host a team. And I thought what was really interesting there to me is that he very much recognizes the thing that all of us have been complaining about with the hub model and how you're not actually going to get local fans until you play games anywhere near those fans. But he had some interesting comments there on they recognize that. They know that that's an issue, and their whole thing is trying to not rush it and do it the right way. So talking about a very slow, more financially responsible build. And to me, that really brings up ties in with these championship game numbers and brings up an interesting point. With all of these leagues, there's a balance between, do you go hard right from the gate? Do you try to become the alternative football? Do you try to really establish yourself that way? And you're going to take an absolute massive loss if you do that. Or do you try to find some sort of middle ground and be a little more financially responsible and hope it pays off in the long run, when the long run is far from assured?
Well, and at some point with that, and I have comments on the hub thing, and Andrew Murray and I are going to kind of do a segment this week as well, kind of, what's next on that. At some point it is kind of, you got to blank or get off the pot. There's only so much kind of trepidation. And I have been mocked a lot about this. I said last year with the USFL, I said, I would have called them the Stallions, the Maulers, the Bandits, whatever. I don't think the payoff do the New Jersey Generals have a semblance of local fan interest because they are named the New Jersey Generals? I don't believe so, because now what's happening is you're running into these things where, hey, maybe we want to revamp the Maulers. Well, you can't change them now. They were in the championship game. You can't, if you were going to make them be the Camp Maulers, or you were going to move. And I think when they had these trademarks, and we brought this up on the podcast, and I said, God, they're picking these cities, and the comments from Daryl back then was, these are the trademarks that we have, and this was the interest back in the 80s. And I said, but that's not conducive to building a market in 2023. And now you're locked into these unless you want to do another Tampa Bay Bandits rebuild. You know, the Maulers would have been in Pittsburgh, or the Generals would have been in Jersey, and not Canton this year if there was that option. Now, just the Maulers winning the division, making it to the championship game, that doesn't immediately say, oh, hey, we got a place now they're going to play in Pittsburgh. They would have done that already.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's an excellent point of how they have limited their future options, because you're right. They are more or less locked into these hub cities unless they make some big changes. And that's going to be interesting, because I agree with you. I really don't think that they have built a lot of even interest in the cities these teams are named after, where they haven't played a game yet. I mean, I in particular, speaking for my local media market in New Orleans, the Breakers get occasional coverage from the local media sites just because they happen to have New Orleans in the name, but like, nobody's talking about them. There's no actual discussion of them in this city. And if they do actually try to play games here, I think even it's going to be year free of the team. They're going to be largely building from scratch.
Yeah, you're kind of resetting that kind of. Yeah, and anything else? I have the quotes here from the Ben Fisher article. Like you said, we're talking about the honor talent. A lot of we're kudoing Joel Klatt and all of that. They're down 16% from they debut, 3% lower. We talked about that. The ratings moving into the markets. The other interesting quote I had was, and this was paraphrased by Ben, Johnston promised renewed efforts to keep the teams and their players visible during the offseason, acknowledging the defending champion Birmingham Stallions' relatively strong fan momentum from the inaugural season did not carry over to the new season. That was, to me, one of the most baffling things was, the drop-off, and we've talked about this, and kind of, we got to keep the offseason. Same with the XFL, you got to keep this, but it didn't feel like Birmingham had a lot of heat. I don't know if that was viewer fatigue or anything else. What did you make? And it wasn't bad. I mean, I don't want to, I'm not poo-pooing on, but it just certainly was not. It didn't feel like a second coming here of our championship team.
Well, I think the thing that's interesting to me there is I think that is where the XFL hurts USFL the most. I think two years ago or last year, I guess, there was it felt very much the USFL was the next thing. The Super Bowl ends, and like we're talking about the NFL draft and so on, but the football discussion becomes about the USFL. And this year, that didn't really happen because the XFL starts so soon after the Super Bowl. That's where the discussion goes. That's what people are watching. That's what people are talking about. And so I think there are some ways to address that. Certainly, if you keep your players visible, you do some interviews with the coaches or whatever. But I think it's hard, and I think that's one area where the USFL schedule is a disadvantage compared to the XFL. I think the XFL really, in a lot of ways, has the right model of let's get this going after the Super Bowl. Let's play for a couple of months, and then also a big part with all of these leagues is about the pathway to the NFL, right? And so, to me, at least, it feels pretty good for the XFL to be wrapping up their season around the NFL draft, and then NFL teams can take their players into consideration then, versus the USFL now. Well, I mean, there's not a lot of roster spots left for even training camp invites.
No, and we've gone back and forth. And like I said, I was on the record where I thought, early on, I go, man, this is great. April, let's get out of the way. We'll rock him into training camp. We saw Brandon Aubrey this week. That got noted that we haven't said officially which team as of this recording here, which is he's going to get on. But yeah, I mean, there's only so many spots there. A couple other questions here we have. So the thought going into the USFL season from last year was that more viewers would watch since it had survived into year 2. And it was now based in more team markets than before. Instead, obviously, ratings are down. If giving 26 over-the-air broadcast windows, being in 3 markets, let's say next year we go to 4, but I think to me the year 1 to year 2 jump of, hey, like the question says, we survived year 1, we're doubling our hubs, we're 26 broadcast windows. What's the next step, or what can they do considering ratings are down this year from like you get what I'm saying? I can't ask the question correctly.
Yeah, well, and I think that's the interesting thing, and I think that's one thing that Daryl Johnston actually hit on quite well. Like, he's right about the broadcast quality. He's right about the names they've brought in. He's right. Like, I mean, I'm sure there are quibbles you can have or so on, but it feels from my standpoint, at least, that like Fox is doing a lot to try and promote this. NBC is doing a lot to try and promote this. And particularly when you mention those broadcast TV windows, like that is an incredible amount for a very unproven league. And so I'm interested to really see how much of that carries over into year 3 after these results. But I mean,
yeah, do you think that sorry to interrupt, do you think they pull back? Do you think they double down, or do you think they pull back?
I don't know. I think, and the thing that's fascinating there is how like the entire broadcast TV ecosystem is changing rather dramatically at this point, right? Like there's far less scripted content coming to broadcast TV at this point. That's largely headed to streaming services. A lot of what you would show on broadcast TV on the weekends way back when is not there anymore. And so even like a lot of these numbers would have been seen as horrible failures even 5 years ago. And that's not where it is right now. So, I mean, I think at the moment they probably stick with something similar, but I think it all depends on what are their alternatives. What else can they do? What other like sports leagues could they throw there? The thing that's fascinating there too is that there's the discussion around cord cutting and how the whole TV ecosystem is shifting. And every league, even the small leagues, trying to sign a rights deal now. They want games on broadcast TV. And so you'll see that in even these tiniest leagues of like, oh, okay, well, most of our stuff's going to be on ESPN Plus, but we've got 2 games on ABC, right? So I wonder if there's going to be some further pressure there for Fox and for NBC and for ESPN ABC with the XFL of like, okay, well, we've also committed to throw these other leagues on our broadcast TV occasionally. And so I think that's all going to be real interesting. I don't think there's a compelling case to be like, yeah, it's dead, let's kill it, let's drop it off broadcast right now. But it all depends on what your alternatives are and what you think they'll do ratings-wise.
Well, and it's obviously with the writer's strike going on and not kind of knowing how long and the long range of that as well, just talking about kind of scripted stuff going on. We, with Greg Parks and I's interview a couple weeks ago with the XFL stuff, the XFL and USFL did to a similar extent last year, positioned itself. Okay, we're trying this out this year. Kind of, this is our audition, right? This is what we're going to do. And now, right, XFL is hoping that those metrics that they have internally is enough for ESPN and ABC to go, hey, yeah, we're okay. We're moving. You're getting the promotion. You're moving on here. USFL, they got a lot of that, and it's kind of, it's kind of like you go into a job and maybe you get a job you're a little underqualified for, but you go, no, don't worry, like we're going to work hard, like your faith. And now they've given you the boatload of money, right? They've given you all these spots, and we paid the Super Bowl, and we've done all the real football, and our emails every week said this is real football for real fans, and I don't know what that makes you if you only watch the XFL, but I think a lot of that, hurt them. I said on our stream, or I said in our I think our USFL thing, it's hard for me to have a league position itself as real football all year and then come out and say, we're baffled why our ratings aren't better. We don't understand that. But, the point is to get that out. USFL auditioned, they were given the promotion, and now it's, like I said, do you fall back or do you stay, because it's either they cut it back, they maintain. I don't know if they double down again. I think they say, we're going to give you the same window this next year or less.
Yeah, well, I think the real interesting thing to watch there is going to be what NBC does. I think Fox, because of their ownership stake here, I haven't seen any indications that they're cutting ties on this yet. And I mean, maybe they could. Who knows? Things change. But I think Fox, and certainly from the amount of promotion they've put into this and the effort they've put into trying to make this a thing, I think they're going to keep trying very hard to make this a thing. I'm really interested to see what NBC thinks, because they are sort of this neutral party. They're the one judging this on its success as a television product rather than a product they have an ownership stake in. And so I'm interested to see how they feel after this second year.
A couple last things. We noted at the top the 1.2 million versus 1.157 if you account for the Peacock kind of streaming and all of that. Obviously, last year Fox doesn't have that similar right. They don't have their own. Throughout the XFL season this year, right, there was always the asterisks of ESPN Plus. We don't know. We don't know how many people. It could be 5, could be 5 million. We don't know. Considering that this gives us a good ballpark, there was probably 50,000 people watching on Peacock. I would imagine your championship game is probably one of the more streamed, if not the most streamed. Considering in good faith, 50,000 about watching USFL product on streaming, at least through the Peacock and NBC. Better or worse than you would think? What do you make of that?
Yeah, I think that's it's decent. I think it's certainly not in the upper level of things we've seen of streaming relative to linear numbers. I think, but it's an okay addition for them. They'll certainly take that. You brought up the ESPN Plus stuff, and I would add there, I agree with some of the things that have been said on that. In that ESPN Plus is probably going to add more than Peacock to an average broadcast, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that it has more subscribers, partly because it's in all the Disney bundles and so on, and then it's linked to Hulu and so on, and it does very well to promote what's actually live at the moment. So I think that is an advantage the XFL has. That's a good streaming partner for them. Peacock's fine. It's certainly better than the real not option from Fox, but I don't think that streaming is going to, and especially over-the-top streaming, I don't think that's going to be the big thing for any of these leagues.
In terms of the demos, obviously USFL skewing higher. Greg Parks had a tweet out today that on average, I think it was 0.16 for the XFL or in the US, 0.16 in the key demo for the USFL versus 0.32. So kind of double for that with the XFL. Anything to account for that? I mean, I know at USFL, we're living off nostalgia here, but in terms of them trying to get, most of the people I see arguing on Twitter, and I know Twitter isn't the be-all end-all, but is not in that demographic. I mean, they try to skew younger. So what do you make of the demo difference between the two?
Yeah, I mean, demo differences are hard, and especially when we're talking about that small of numbers in general. But the one thing I would say there is that I think more than a USFL failing, I think that is an XFL edge. And I think the big XFL edge there is that the younger demographics like wrestling a whole lot, and like the WWE, and The Rock connects a lot there. And I don't know that the USFL has anything comparable to any of that. And so I think that is some very, even though there's no real connection to wrestling or the WWE or anything at this point, but I think there is some useful crossover there of, hey, that's The Rock. I like The Rock. This is his league. I'll check that out.
Last question for me in terms of both the XFL and the USFL going forward. What do you think both leagues should do here in terms of the windows? ESPN said after the season, right, they want to focus obviously getting better network clearances, kind of days of the week. We still got to figure out the March Madness of it all. We've talked about maybe doing a bye week during March Madness. We've talked about doing maybe a rolling bye week during March Madness to kind of clear out some of the stuff. What would you like to see the XFL and the USFL do here if you had your druthers going into next year?
Yeah, so I think for the XFL, I think the obvious one is let's get off of FX. And I think there's an argument, and it's interesting in that from a distribution side, FX is fine. FX is comparable to a lot of ESPN2, whatever. But I think there's an argument that you might be better off putting the game on even a lower distributed channel like ESPN News or ESPNU, where people are more likely to go for sports. I think any analysis of the XFL ratings showed that FX was a big problem for them this year. And so I'm interested to see how they try to address that. For the USFL, I think, to me, it feels like they're doing all the right things on the broadcast side, especially with the amount of network TV games they're able to get. I think, to me, the big thing just with the USFL at the moment is it's the classic field of dreams. If you build it, they will come. Well, from my perspective, they've built it, but the audiences haven't come yet, and so I'm interested to see if that'll change.
I like that. We had, when we were talking about the Cashman Field of it all in Las Vegas, I said the XFL was building the Field of Dreams. So now the USFL building that. Last note, just to make sure we talk about it, and it's been on the screen here if you're watching on the YouTube, but we have some kind of the numbers here at the bottom with the USFL season comparisons being down 29% on NBC, 28% on Fox, 26% on USA, and then the 1.7 increase on FS1. So kind of around the board there. I think the FS1 was probably, I don't know if that was the rain game on that one, or they had a couple delays or whatever, but about 30% there across the board on the network. So it was weird to me. I would have thought the NBC championship game would have done better this year, just because NBC typically does do better than Fox in terms of the average ratings per their networks, which is interesting. But Andrew, anything else from you? I appreciate kind of the deep dive here today, end of the season stuff.
No, absolutely. I appreciate you bringing me on. I think it's great to see two alternative U.S. football leagues still going. I personally hope they both keep going, and that we're able to have lots more alternative football discussions in the future.
Andrew, appreciate it again. Take care, and everyone check out the work over at Awful Announcing. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Well,
Andy, we did it. We successfully made it through the 2023 season. Come on down. It's time to play the feud today. We're here trying to figure out kind of who won the football war, football feud here in 23, and kind of what's next. We've done kind of a little bit of the XFL, and obviously that'll air into this as well today, but kind of what's next for the USFL as well. How are you, sir?
I want to know where Steve Harvey is. If we're going to have the feud, we need to have our host, don't we? But I guess you could play that role too.
Yeah, I'll be the host today. I did it. Even in that, I was just trying to download a clip to obviously play in the show, and even in just like the random full episode I downloaded, they were asking like, "What's the number that men exaggerate?" And you were supposed to be like height, weight, whatever, and the woman's like 69. Like, okay, I mean, even the most basic questions kind of get those weird answers now, but. We're here. I wanted to figure this out. We've had Andrew Buchholz on here. I think I'll air this after this. We'll kind of sandwich this in here, a deep dive meat sandwich here, talking about all this. But, viewership down. We have the championship down 23.8% compared to year over year. We got some ballpark streaming numbers, all of that. What have you made of the USFL season? You've been along, and I know Pat's filled in a lot on some of the recaps, but you've been, we followed along this whole time. So what have you made?
For me, I think it was a proof of concept that even though you have a lot of ambitions to save money and try to improve the longevity of your product, at the end of the day, you still need to put something out there that's going to draw people in. And basically, from what I saw from the ratings, from the attendance to how the play on the field presented itself, the USFL basically had 4 more versions of the same thing last year, as in 4 more places to play in, 4 more or 3 more hubs, I should say, and 4 hubs overall. And you pretty much got the exact same thing as last year, which from the standpoint of the quality of football was fine. If you're talking about the level of football and the level of competition, maybe it was a little bit better this year. Although the same team ended up winning anyways and ended up being crowned champion at the end of the season. So you can argue about how much parity there really was in this league. But as far as what was presented and what was expected to attract more people, I mean, it kind of flatlined, honestly. There was not really an improvement overall from the standpoint of how many people were engaged in it from a TV viewing perspective. Maybe from an attendance perspective, you saw some success in a market, say, like you were mentioning last week, Memphis. Memphis did see some improvement overall as the season went along. But going into that season, into last season, all I heard was Michigan was going to be a great market. I think it did okay, but not really what I think people were expecting. And Canton was mostly indifferent because the fact that there was 2 teams that weren't from the same area, that were from neighboring states, from a neighboring state that didn't really have a team that they knew about, that being, being the New Jersey Generals and being the Pittsburgh Maulers. So I don't know. It just kind of felt like more of the same in a lot of ways. I mean, there was improvement from certain players. There was improvement from maybe some of the coaching. There wasn't maybe as many as egregious gaffes, but then again, trying to improve on someone like Kirby Wilson and Jeff Fisher to me is not that hard to do. But overall, I mean, it didn't really feel like there was any substantial differences between season 1 and season 2, or I should say the 2022 season, the 2023 season.
Yeah, because now we're in the historical record books, that
Right.
in the modern day USFL, whatever. Here's a thought I have. So, I've spent time listening. Obviously we've read the Ben Fisher, Moose Johnson, that kind of baffled, ratings comments and all of that, surprised that they were down so low. I watched a lot of the press conference here again today that was going alongside when we were doing kind of our pregame kickoff show on Friday. Moose strikes me as a lot more humble than I think. I think if the USFL embraced kind of Moose's, hey, we are a family, we appreciate we have the Kirby Wilsons, whatever, like they're our family. We appreciate them. We're kind of slowly building. I like his, because obviously we don't listen to Daryl talk a lot. And I think there's a disc, and I know that Daryl doesn't run Fox marketing, but there seems to be a difference between kind of the verbosity or verboseness that Fox Sports has versus Moose here, where I think if he was maybe more focal, right, but talking, they're trying to figure out all this stuff. But my thought listening to him when they're talking about expansion, trying to figure out, okay, we want to keep the hub model till we do all this. I've said all along, I think they should have had the teams be sand cities, right? Maybe we have the Birmingham team and then whatever. What if, go back 2 years and then we're not relocating teams or we're not rebranding teams? What if then you got rewarded a USFL team? Like we award, like, okay, now at the end of the season, hey, we've got 3 new markets. Like, okay, Canton, you're getting the Maulers. Like that's, and then we relocate them out of there, as opposed to this weird, like I said, we've talked on here. No one in New Jersey knows the Generals are playing, or no one in whatever. Where maybe you get a little bit of. I mean, obviously they can't go back now, but maybe you get a little boost out of that. Versus, okay, we're retroactively moving them in, or we're changing it after the fact, right? To be more, if they could have been more proactive about it. Is that a terrible idea?
No, it's so weird that there's such a collision of 2 brands, the Spring League and the USFL brand. I think we've talked about this all along. It's like taking the pageantry of the USFL and trying to inject it into the Spring League model, which doesn't really mesh, because I think those are 2 different ideas completely. The USFL originally was teams in the cities, separate ownership, competition with the NFL. Obviously they know that you can't have that sort of same parallel with the NFL anymore, but the Spring League was just so different in terms of having these entities that were just kind of like stocks, I guess, or just some sort of like entity just to own. Like it was just owning something that you bought, basically, and hoping that the value of it increased over time. And that was Brian Woods' whole model, which was fine. And it was also a chance for people to get tape and go and practice. I mean, it's really remarkable, honestly, going back and looking at some of the rosters for the Spring League and seeing all the guys that moved on from there, moved on to the CFL, or moved on to the USFL, moved on to the XFL. I mean, you see a lot of those parallels, and that's kind of what it should have been viewed as. But instead, now you're having kind of the hub model, which is fine. You continue to have the hub model, but instead of awarding the cities, it's kind of like this, like almost forced nostalgia, like you're trying to make fetch happen in terms of getting people to understand, well, no, this is the great brand that existed past, in the 80s, the Showboats. Remember them? Oh, the Generals. Do you remember them? Oh, the Maulers. Do you remember them? Quite frankly, a lot of people either don't or they just don't care anymore. And that's just the reality of the situation. It's so different from like the XFL, who just keeps rebranding over and over again, which is really funny to me, because like the mantra and the attitude of it is somewhat similar, and yet like they keep changing teams and names all the time, and they don't really seem to care about tradition in that way. Whereas the USFL is like almost too beholden to tradition. So I kind of agree with you in that maybe they should just grant a team to a city that they think is worthy and then continue to move them out. Maybe, I don't know, maybe 4 hubs was aggressive. It was welcomed, but maybe it was too aggressive this year. I mean, Memphis worked out. Like that worked out really well. Michigan was okay. I think the the whole can thing, just again, I just noticed it was maybe a little bit much at the end of the season, especially in the playoffs, because people had been going over and over and over and over again in that market. So, yeah, it's whatever's going on. I feel like there's still these two brand ideas that are still kind of colliding with each other, and they haven't really meshed.
Well, because they're so beholden to it. I mean, and I was listening to the Mooses thing, and I will say, like, Andy and I remarked about this at the top of the show. There were so many, and I know it was the USFL weekend, like, so many people at this press conference, right? I know, obviously, the newsroom crew was there, and whoever the other, the one that I was watching here with Believe Land Media, like, all these guys, we have all these cell phone videos at the press conference. Do a write up some quotes. I saw James post like one tweet, like, "Hey, Daryl's looking, their walk, crawl, run, or whatever." I'm like, write an article about it. Write an article so we can figure this out now, because I got to go back, I got to regurgitate, and then I'm doing no better here, where I'm talking on this podcast that no one's going to listen to. But yeah, anyway, they're just so beholden to these cities now, right? And we've talked about this, like if Pittsburgh. How do you rebrand Pittsburgh now, where they've been in the championship game? How do you rebrand? Obviously Birmingham is solidified. I don't know. I know that the USFL was trying to beat the XFL to the punch, right? And Fox, and they wanted to go last year. If you had rolled out just the Spring League 2022, put a little bit more marketing behind it. I mean, they got 400,000 viewers, whatever, on that Fox, that Saturday weekend game in that May of 21. Like, then you're not dealing with all this headache. You're not dealing with the city nonsense. You're not dealing with the trademark stuff. I know you've got the boost off nostalgia, but I mean, we're seeing the numbers here, and I have them, if we wanted to pull it up, but some of these games, I wonder what the level, if this swing, if they could have had two or three more steps, excuse me, before getting to this.
It almost feels like if some Hollywood executive producer said, "Hey, instead of filming this in a green screen and in one of our studio lots, let's film this in a garage, see how that works." And the pageantry of filming a Hollywood production will bring everyone together. It kind of feels that way in that, again, they take this established brand and they're trying to put it through a straw, like basically trying to put it through a straw and have it be presented in a really minuscule way. Whereas, like you said, if they just rolled out the second version of the Spring League or whatever version of it and just said, "Hey, this is the football we're presenting. We have bigger ideas, but we want to continue building out with this and improving it," which it already had been. I mean, that's the thing. The Spring League started really small. It basically started out of Brian's garage, and he basically brought it out into being more expanded. He did the hub model. He did it in 2 different hubs. And like, it drew viewership, even though there was like no marketing behind it. There was nothing besides, "Hey, there's football on TV," and that was fine. But with the USFL, it was just the expectation, the automatic expectation of, as we've gone over, is just, "Oh, there's football. You should be interested in this," right? But with there being more numbers expected, and clearly those numbers have not come, because again, I think the way they went about presenting that same product didn't mesh with the audience that they were expecting, because they are looking for one thing, and I think they're presenting a completely different thing. And again, it's okay as long as you give them that ideal, but the casual audience, I think when you profess to have such an established brand, they expect a certain quality. And maybe most people are expecting all the teams to be in their markets, all the teams to have some sort of grandstanding tradition, like maybe a CFL fan, for example, and it's not there. And so when it's not there, they ask questions. That's just how it is.
This is going to blow your socks. So I just looked this up on here, because I'm kind of like, this is all trying to remember here, fever dream. Like, what were the Spring League? Let's ponder this for a minute here, XFL and USFL stands. If you look back at this, Mike Mitchell here, the Spring League 2021 on Fox TV rates, 380,000. 444,000, 418,000, 400. Now this is on Fox, right? Obviously, like FS1 average 181,000. That was up 503% over the year before, because I'm presuming better time slots, so they weren't aired at 2 a.m. here. On Spring League, they averaged 409,000 viewers on Fox. They weren't even paying their players, right? I mean, we had no branding, no cities, no anything. And if you're telling me that, we got to cripple ourselves with this lawsuit for a year and deal with Steve Earhart and all of this, and everything that's gone on with, well, I want the generals back in the day, like, I had no, the fact that they average, what say you here? That's remarkable to me.
I mean, those are comparable to numbers that we saw this year, which is
that's what I'm saying.
That is what's so bizarre about this. This whole TV thing has been so fascinating in that this league owns the USFL. They didn't own the Spring League, and yet they have these comparable numbers to their own product that they own by themselves, that they promote by themselves, that they put advertising through, and they try to put through all their syndicated channels and all of their personalities on TV, you know, Colin Cowherd and Skip and all of them. And yet, two things stand out. One, this. And second of all, they're getting better numbers on NBC. And we've talked about that. They've had better viewership drawn on NBC on some of their products. And it's so bizarre that it's like, for whatever reason, the USFL on the Fox channel is not hitting the same beats. And yet, all these other things do. TSL on the Fox with no promotion whatsoever, no brand identity, no familiarity with the audience. And then it's doing also, the USFL is doing better on NBC. It's the weirdest parallel ever. I mean, I guess it'd be the same if like the XFL did better on FX for some magic reason more than the ESPN, for example. Like if for whatever reason, everyone just is like, yeah, I really love watching football on FX. Okay, why? You know, that would be, it's kind of feels like that a little bit. It's really strange. And I guess, like I said, like you said, maybe there wasn't that same expectation level of people, and therefore it was measured. And they said, okay, well, we know they're playing in front of no people. But also keep in mind, again, I have to stress this. It was a different time. The TSL was playing during COVID. There were people who weren't in stands. That was an expectation. That was fine. That's not the case anymore. There are people in the stands. There are people showing up to sporting events again. You expect a certain energy level to come with that. And when the model doesn't really match with what's going on with the rest of the culture in terms of actually having people back in the stands, then yeah, people are going to start kind of comparing those two times. And people would much rather watch games with fans in the stands. I mean, like I said, I have a really hard time going back to watching games that happened during 2020 and 2021 because it's really weird watching, you know, games where there's like cardboard cutouts behind, you know, baseball games or cardboard cutouts behind home plate, or, you know, watching the NBA bubble or stuff like that, because it's just like, it's like time capsules. Like, what happened here? And so I think there's that's really a big thing for me, is that there are just these disparate attitudes towards what was being presented and what people expect when they're watching these two products. So for Fox, I mean, they got to figure out a way to, I don't know, drum up support in some way and try to get people to be convinced that they should be engaged in this product, even though the numbers are just not there, especially with the attendance.
I have the article here, and I have the awful announcing version of this. Obviously, the original credit goes to Ben Fisher over at Sports Business Journal. Daryl, baffled TV ratings, viewership. Were you baffled at all? And then I have a follow up about relocating the cities. But were you baffled at all that the ratings were down this year?
I'm sure the half dozen people who comment on my Twitter thread would say I'm an idiot for not being baffled. But you know what? Listen, I don't think that's really expected here, or should be expected here. Shock is not the emotion that is warranted here. I'm glad Daryl's baffled, because maybe he cares about it a lot, and he really did expect a lot better. And good for him. You know what? If he has expectations for this league, that's what he should have. That being said, as an objective viewer, I would say absolutely not. This is what you're going to have when there's not really a end over end expectation of what is going to be different from the year before, or cachet, or, you know, you don't have that like really outstanding star player, or there's not really somebody to latch onto or personalities to latch onto. Yes, there's a lot of interesting stories, of course, and for us to follow them is really is just kind of part of our mission statement, obviously, as media members. But as far as this being an expectation for why casual viewers are not being engaged in the product, why would you be baffled? Again, not much changed besides, okay, there's a few more hubs. Okay, there's a new brand with Memphis coming back and Tampa Bay going away. But I mean, the players were basically, most of them were the same. The level of play again was mostly the same, and the product visually, I mean, yeah, you could talk about graphics packages. Cool. That's a really cool thing to nerd out on. Most people don't care about graphics packages. Like, that's something that most casual viewers are not watching a football game for. It's an addition. It's something that is cool to add on to it. As far as the presentation goes, Fox did a good job in giving all their games out. But as far as what people were expecting, I mean, again, it was almost the same in a lot of ways. So I really don't understand what's there to be baffled by, other than the fact that you thought because there was a second season, you thought that people would be impressed that there was a second season of a league, which maybe some people are, but most people probably didn't watch last year and still don't even know that the USFL is back.
Well, I also think there's a non-zero number of people that don't know that quite the difference, even that there is an XFL and a USFL and kind of all that stuff. Because my thing is this: when it comes to these city expansions, and obviously we see this, all the time, and I talk with Brett and the guys that run the Facebook groups and everything else. It's the expanding the hubs is, that's the silver bullet, right? Like, that's our one bullet in the chamber here. Okay, we add a hub. Immediate way to get a pop, right? That's how we did the Memphis thing, we got a pop, we did the Detroit. You can only do that so many times, right? It's the same with the XFL. We can only expand so many cities or add so many things. And what I don't like about it is, in listening to Moose's comments, and I don't, he's in a weird position where he is more involved in the football, and he's kind of talking on the kind of the more larger ranging football ops, and obviously he's part of that, but that's not necessarily his purview, right? Daryl Johnson, in terms of okay, where are we going next? But it negates kind of anything else I feel like they should be doing in the meantime, right? It's kind of like, if you I'm trying to I need to get a new job. I don't like my job. I need to get a new job. Where if you just worked harder at your current job, you could increase your current position of whatever. I was like, well, no, we got to move somewhere else. I got to go do that. You're like, yeah, but you're not being wildly successful even in the metrics that you are right now, right? So I don't know, just adding the hub versus let's bolster up, let's get some New Jersey support in here, let's do some marketing. I know they're trying to do more of the fan stuff and they're trying to do the Memphis, but they're not, where you're not even succeeding. I would say being down, 30%. I mean, when you're not succeeding currently at the level, I would, hopefully you would internalize some of that, as opposed to just saying well, we got to go add another hub. That's clearly what we have to do. Because I think there's things they could be doing right now that they could do in tandem with that, if that makes sense.
I feel like this league needs to go a minor league baseball route in terms of appealing to their individual cities and saying, maybe having some more gimmicky stuff, not gimmicky play or gimmicky coaches, but maybe in terms of the entertainment, have a couple more sponsored events or things that happen, maybe games that people can be involved in, giving the reason for fans to be involved besides, oh, you can come and watch a football game for $10. Okay. Or giving away spatulas, apparently, like Memphis did,
I wanted one of those.
I wanted one of those too. That's a cute idea, but that's maybe not always the best way to get people involved. And again, Memphis was one of the better markets, so maybe that was a huge hit with the contingency of dads in the Memphis area. But I think there needs to be more emphasis on playing down to that level of look, we know we're not the NFL. It's fine. It's a little kitschy. I get it, but we're gonna have fun with this. Here's how we can have fun with this. That's kind of what I think needs to be done. I don't know, but I don't know if that necessarily works for both them or the XFL, for example, because the XFL, I think in some ways still takes themselves very seriously in terms of what they're trying to get done. And I argue they still should, do some more promoting in terms of getting people involved and throwing more bones to the fans themselves, because I think there's a lot that they didn't do last year. We've talked about that before as well. But the USFL, again, yeah, it can be a good atmosphere for families, but I'm not seeing that. I'm not seeing that on TV. I'm not seeing that in terms of what's actually happening, in terms of what's being done here for the people who actually want to be involved and actually want to go to these games. Is this a viable option to take my child to an afternoon game on a Saturday instead of doing this, right? That's that's what you always have to ask yourself as, you know, as a promoter. That's something that you need to understand, and trying to give people a reason to go. Look, I was told for years as a resident here, as a San Diego resident, that the reason that people didn't show up to games was because, well, you know, there's a billion other things to do in San Diego because the weather's nice and people like going outside, and there's no reason. Everyone's a fair weather fan. Well, let me tell you, look, despite their record, the Padres are selling out their games left and right. You know why? Because they gave their fans a reason to go to games. They put their money where their mouth was. They got talent. They got people involved. They have great games. They have a great atmosphere. It's fantastic for families to go to. They adjusted the time schedule so that it was more accommodable for families to go to the games, instead of, you know, getting to a game at 7:10 p.m. at night on a Wednesday and being like, well, no children are going to show up to this event, and being more accommodable with the fans. And it's worked. You know, it really worked, and it's worked for years. And I think this is something that you have to give a reason, prioritization. Why should I come to your thing instead of this? That's what I don't get. Instead of just saying, well, we have this, why don't people show up? You should say, why aren't people showing up, and how can we adjust those expectations? Because guess what? People have lives.
And then that's it. And that's to make my point shorter. Yes, like these are all the things versus just, well, we need to call the team the Canton Legend versus the, you know, Pittsburgh Maulers or whatever. Like there's tangible things you can be doing. I want to eventually direct the conversation to, you know, this, like, who won the feud, whatever. Like that's more just branding for today. But I do want to have a conversation for kind of who had the more successful season. In terms of the other thing that came out of the press conference was Moose talking about they're in the infancy stages of kind of being basically being a feeder system, I guess, right, to the NFL, and the teams can retain rights. And to me, it struck a little bit of like, we need to have some ideas to talk about today at this press conference, right? We're like, nothing is for sure about that. Like, is that enough? Is that a thing? I mean, is this years down the line? Does the NFL even need something like this? I mean, what do you make of that, this infancy stages?
I've been told this, and I've been spun this from people my entire life, saying the NFL needs a feeder system. Newsflash, no, they don't. You know why? Because that requires money and capital, and they're not going to spend that if they have a free talent supply, AE or IE, the NCAA. They don't need to spend money because guess what? They already have a free talent pool for that. They don't need to develop this by themselves. There already is something that does that for them. Now, our goal, you and I and all the people in our group, is to promote the people who maybe were overlooked, the people who didn't get that second chance, or people who fell through the cracks, or maybe just weren't quite there in terms of the development stage and just needed a little bit more time before they got into the league. Those are the kind of people that we champion. The NCAA is for people who are ready immediately. You know, these are the prospects. These are the hot prospects that come out immediately and are ready to contribute at this moment. And as long as that's a free supply of talent, the NFL is never going to start a feeder system. I'm just putting that forward right now. And I get that people want to have a minor league and all that. They really don't need it because the owners don't want to spend money on that because they know they don't have to. This is not like other leagues. It's not MLS. It's not NHL. It's not MLB. It's not NBA. Like NBA is even getting more involved with this with the G League and having players that play at this, you know, professional level before being promoted, because it does take time to be mature enough to play in the NBA because people are not staying in college long enough. You know, that's a whole nother argument. But with the NFL, you don't need to have that. And so, no, I don't think that's going to be ultimately the goal. What you have to do, though, is somehow establish yourself enough. And I mean, maybe have some sort of notoriety of saying, well, this player moved on from our league and they did these great things. Is that enough to get people to come to your games? I don't know. I think there needs to be more legwork that's done separate from that, not just resting on your laurels and saying, well, look at all these great players that we've always promoted. You know, I think the CFL is finding that out right now. Yes, I get it. Warren Moon played for your league. You know, Doug Flutie played for your league. You know, it's awesome. Fantastic. But those days are gone. You know, those kinds of players aren't coming out of your league anymore. So what are you going to do to get people to get in the stands? You have to be able to find another way to promote yourself beyond just, oh, we sent X player to this league. Well, okay, to the NFL. Cool. Awesome. But you're not going to have a partnership with them because they don't want to spend money on it.
Well, also, I was just thinking about that. Yeah, I mean, it's decades now from when the CFL had any of that. And the closest thing they have now is, God forbid, Nathan Rourke takes a snap in Jacksonville. Hey, he's like, yeah, he played in your league for a backup for a year and then played for a season and got out literally as quick as he could. Like literally it was like, I want to get out of here immediately. I don't want to be here. You know, this is unexpected detour, I think was the phrase that he had on there. So in terms of the seasons this year, and there, you know, so we've talked about, you know, with USFL and be better off if, you know, you just, we rolled the spring league out and we got could you imagine a world in 2023 where the Jousters are playing the Hughes? And I mean, I just would, you know, it's like, I know there's nostalgia. I know people have nostalgia for like the Generals. I have nostalgia for the Jousters, but in the XFL's side, right, you have, so I think USFL is handicapped by, okay, we got the USFL branding, kind of all those things going on. XFL expectations are handicapped by, well, we got The Rock, right? You should draw 18 million people, right? You got The Rock. And I think if you remove The Rock from the equation, and I know you can't, you know, whatever, but like, I thought XFL was a pretty good success this year, right? And I know that people will call it home or whatever, like, but the metrics of that, you know, obviously we got it into year 2, but how do you stack up, you know, season 2 of the USFL versus season 1 of the XFL here?
Well, first of all, I just want to say I'm no stranger to forced nostalgia myself. Reed, I hold on to the corpse of a team that played 8 games, was below 500, and had quarterback trouble, that being the San Diego Fleet. And I desperately hold on to that team, its identity and its brand, because it was my team. And I have really absolutely no reason to do so anymore because that league was going to flame out. The writing was on the wall. But to answer your question, I mean, the thing is with the XFL, it felt like there was greater potential that never got realized. And I think you and Mike Mitchell basically gave it somewhat on the periphery of like a C grade as far as what it actually accomplished. And in terms of, you know, it being a 7 out of 10. In terms of just because there was so much that was expected because of based on what had happened in 2020, and it didn't feel like they pushed all the right buttons. There were some great benchmarks, but there were a lot of other things that didn't happen. And I think that's different from the USFL. Like I've said before, I think the XFL, in my opinion, has had a higher ceiling in terms of expectations and what it can accomplish, whereas the USFL has a higher floor in terms of what they're doing. But they're more concerned with being on that floor and being, you know, just a baseline standard. So I guess in terms of what was accomplished, I would say the USFL did a better job. But in terms of, again, what was overall maybe more engaging and what was actually presented that was enjoyed a little bit more from my standpoint, it was the XFL, just in terms of the plays, the players involved, the coaches involved, the games in a lot of ways. And I mean, there were some really good games in the USFL, but it just felt like the XFL meant a little bit more, you know, how chaotic it was for a team like Orlando to get their only victory against the DC Defenders and just an absolutely wild shootout, or to see Arlington almost complete an insane comeback against DC as well. DC was really just involved with like all the craziest games this year, by the way. So if that's why I'm using them in so many examples, but you know, I think in terms of like your expectation levels being met, I don't think the XFL really did that. But then again, my expectation levels for the USFL weren't really that high to begin with because I kind of expected similar to what was happening last year. So again, that's why the baffled comments from Daryl Johnson are amusing to me, because I don't think there's really much to be baffled by. Whereas I would argue there were more things with the XFL that baffled me where I said, why are they doing this? Like, the jersey snafu still to me is just like one of the most egregious errors that they committed in terms of not getting them out of time and then, you know, charging them for an exorbitant amounts of money. That to me was more baffling than a lot of other things that happened in the USFL. So that's where I'm kind of at with that. Whereas one didn't really meet their expectations, the other one did, but it wasn't really that more impressive.
It's interesting, you know, and obviously context of, okay, we know the broadcast windows and we know the XFL had fewer network, you know, all those things. Okay, we have all the context for it. But it is remarkable to me that all the arguing we've done all year, right, in terms of, okay, you know, every week the ratings come out and people are screaming and people are yelling and we're talking the gameplay and the parity of the leagues and, you know, all this tribalism back and forth and kind of all that stuff. We ended up with a difference of, you know, 300, you know, negligible difference, 300, you know, 3,000 kind of average. And I know XFL had worse windows, but 3,000 difference We still had at least one losing team in you know in the championship game, kind of all that stuff. It's strikes me as funny how similar both of them ended up being, even though we obviously always have our own perceived biases about all that. It's kind of like there was a couple years ago, because I freelance now for 10 years, and I might do 100 different jobs a year, 150, weddings, and we got, like all the, hey, I'll pay you $200. Can you come and go do whatever? And I remember one year I went to go do my taxes, and I think I was like $1,300 difference between the one year and the other. And I'm like, that's remarkable to me. Like how many different things I've done this year, and, people calling me, like, feels the same way here. As much as we've argued all the year, it feels like, at least from a number standpoint, they're at the same place right now. Do you feel like that, or do you feel like there's more momentum with one or the other?
I mean, I think the XFL has a greater chance for momentum, but it's a matter if they take it or not. Whereas the USFL, I think, has a better chance at longevity if they just kind of stay the course, if that makes sense. But, like, that's the thing. Like, is there going to be longevity from both of these leagues? For how long are they both going to be okay with just competing against one another? And what's going to happen eventually? That's kind of the biggest question going forward. I've had multiple people tell me from different parts of my experience as a football fan, whether it's somebody who just watches the NFL or people who actually are in this community or whatever, people telling me like, well, the league should just merge, just merge the two entities. And I still maintain that philosophically they're too different for that to happen. One of them is going to have to sacrifice their pride in order to let that happen. And I think there's just too much ego involved that either side is not going to do that. So forget that idea right now. But in terms of survival, I mean, again, I think the XFL has a chance to do that. They have a lot of chances to do it. It's just, again, if they can take the right steps and they can be more, which league is going to be more humble and which one is going to have more humility in terms of realism as far as what they are, and not just trying to force something that's not going to actually happen. And I think both leagues are still figuring that out. Daryl Johnson's figuring that out. The Rock and Danny are still figuring that out. Their expectation levels clearly are very different from what reality has dealt them. As you said, they're both kind of numbers-wise were very similar. Maybe one spent more money than the other, or one put these resources where this one didn't. But at the end of the day, they're pretty much on the same level as far as like which product. I mean, you're basically, I guess, your decision making is that comparable to that of, am I shopping at Marshalls or am I shopping at Target today? Like, I guess that's kind of where it is at this moment. Some people don't see it that way. Some people think way lesser than the other, but in reality, that's kind of what's happening right now. But it depends on what you think you put more stock into, what you think is potentially going to be better.
Because like I said, first off, I think Target's a step above Marshalls. I think that was blasphemy there.
I was trying to think of another comparison. I personally believe that too, but I was like, what's another comparison to Target? I don't know what the comparable.
Ross and Marshalls is Ross.
Yeah, probably Ross and Marshalls. Yeah.
But like that's the thing is like this whole year it's been every day, every week, and Mike posting all this stuff and other people copying and pasting tweets, and like for 3,000 average viewer difference is just remarkable to me. And I know Max went into it because Bill Shea was commenting on some of this stuff, and Bill's a friend of the show, so I will give him as much leniency to have his platform and his views. I think he's earned that, and he's sitting there going back and forth, because Max's comments were, he wishes the media covered these ratings a little bit more fairly, because if the XFL's ratings were anemic and the USFL's ratings met expectations, it's like, well, how can both of these be in the same realm, and one's anemic and one meets expectations? And Bill basically said, well, if you think there's some grand conspiracy about all this, to get for the 3,000, what do you have to say?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, is that kind of a backhanded compliment from Bill? If you think about it, if he's saying one is anemic, the other one is meeting expectations, and they're both similar, is that him saying, I expected the USFL to just be this way? And if he's saying the XFL is anemic, is he saying that the XFL should be higher in terms of ratings? I think that's how I interpret it. Now, he may disagree with me, but I think that's how I interpret it, because if you're using that wording about the XFL and saying this is not comparable, this is not good enough, then maybe that tells me that you expected their ratings to be a little bit better. Because if you're saying the other one is meeting expectations and they're both comparable, that's how I see it. And that's honestly, Reed, that's how I feel. I think the XFL's ratings should have been better in a lot of ways. I think the USFL is pretty much doing what I expected it to do, and maybe even a little bit worse than I expected. But that's honestly, there was not really much that I was expecting to change during the season. Did I think the time slots and the broadcasting, portals were better? Yes, of course. They got more network games, but clearly that didn't seem to make much of an impact, and it arguably didn't at all, because nobody watched Fox that much more than they regularly would have. And now you have this comparable rating of like what metric actually averaged out this. As you said over and over, like if the NBC game after the Preakness Stakes had been taken out, that would have lowered the average even more, because that was just an outstanding outlier in the viewership. So, that's always this is always going to be a comparison battle, and that's going to be the same thing next year. I'm already not looking forward to this being a pissing contest next year either, but this is what's going to happen, because people are going to argue about this as far as like what they value in the league. I argue that, again, I think what was also interesting yesterday was the streaming numbers. That needs to be more data that has to be looked at harder, because I still don't think TV ratings ultimately in the future are going to matter all that much. It's all going to be streaming numbers. Whether we get access to those streaming numbers is another question, but that's another thing that people will have to look at, and that's for the companies to decide themselves. Either way, if both of these entities think that it's viable to keep these things on television, or at least keep them around, then clearly they believe in them in some manner, shape, or form. I don't think this is going to suddenly change their thoughts overnight. But a lot of fans see it that way, and they see it as, well, my favorite TV show is going to get the plug's going to get pulled on it. I don't think it's the same thing. Sports is in a different category in terms of that. It's more of just, can they supply themselves with enough cash flow to be able to stay alive?
So I kind of use this podcast I'm looking on here. I use this as kind of a measuring stick, my own metric, and obviously because we're talking TV ratings and streaming and all that. But if you look at our show last year, Birmingham, the live show, 3,000 viewers for that. This year we had 1,500. Now, obviously we weren't there live, but YouTube doesn't know in the algorithm kind of if you're live there or not. And then if you look at our championship game show this year, 670 views. So like, I can tell you there's a waning interest in this product, at least year over year, and then certainly year going into the championship game. There's a certain level of buzz. And I think the XFL was victim to that as well, but of trying to kind of maintain that kind of that momentum throughout. But I will tell you, the USFL felt very cold to me going into the championship game this year. Did you agree, disagree?
I mean, I think the matchup wasn't as sexy because there was no Case Cookus, there was no stars this time around, which was a little more spicy last year. But in terms of, again, being the only game in town, because again, maybe it's viewer fatigue. I don't know. Maybe people were just like over it at this point. I think that the numbers bear out in terms of how people view the league and what people wanted to see from it. And now that the Stallions have kind of established themselves as the dominant team, and there's not really other teams that kind of match their level of play, maybe it just wasn't as intriguing to people. But again, being the only game in town helps a lot too. Last year, the USFL was here, the XFL was not. This year, both of them are sharing the same space. And peripherally, maybe there are people who are, getting more into the CFL or checking out that league as well. There's a lot of mitigating factors here, but for me, it just says that the USFL needs to put more stock into what they have and try to improve their product even further so that they can entice people to continue watching, because the idea of just having football is not enough for some people. It's great as far as having a product to consume, but as far as a product to watch and to engage in from an entertainment standpoint, there needs to be some improvements. And clearly people had seen enough that they said, all right, this is enough. I don't need to watch anymore. And that's not the feeling you want to have, especially with a new league. Well, old a new league, I guess, in a way. So that's the only thing that has to change. And the pageantry is great. Again, they could have all the IPs and they can talk about the old players. That's great. But again, I don't think that's really the target demographic they should be shooting for. They need to be appealing, again, to the younger audience and saying, this is why you should engage in this and why you should watch this.
And if you want any context for how hot the CFL Grey Cup show was last year, over 15,000 viewers for that. So if you want any context for like how big is the we poo poo and people poo poo the CFL ratings, all that stuff. There 15,000 for that pregame show the day before from a we were at the casino up there. I did have a funny comment on my YouTube that made me laugh where. They said the reason why the USFL ratings were down this year is you had a losing team in the championship game and you needed to have two hot teams. I said, well, I don't know how the XFL pulled it off thing because the XFL pulled in more viewership.
Well, I mean, the funny thing is though, I feel like Arlington was hot. It's just their record didn't look good. But that make no mistake, that team. I've said this before. Listen, the Maulers, I think they were the same team the entire year. I don't think really much changed with them. They just they managed to get their way to the championship game. That Arlington team, that was not the same team I saw in San Antonio. Those were two completely different teams. So if you want to talk about hotness, that team was on fire. It's just they weren't above 500, which wasn't fun. And it was also the fact that the playoff system didn't work. I think that's also something that's something that has to be addressed to these leagues that might delegitimize them. And I don't understand why this is such a hard concept to people understand. Listen, I don't care that there's only 8 teams. You need to have a wild card system. This division thing is nonsense. I don't care. It doesn't matter. I don't care if there's only 8 teams. Better record needs to get in. End of story. That's it. Not arguing about this anymore because people have tried to argue with me about it. And I'm like, no, that doesn't make sense. Just none of this playoff math scenario, none of this, calculus math that we have to get from ESPN about why didn't the Battlehawks get in and the Sea Dragons did. I don't want any more of it. Just record. If you crossover, if this team didn't perform well enough to win in your division, but can beat another team in the other division, put them in there. It's fine. Who cares? The divisions, honestly, in my opinion, don't matter that much, so much as it is the matchups. I don't think it really should be that traditional yet. We're not to that point. So I don't think it's really something that matters that much. And the CFL doesn't matter, obviously. They're like, cool, crossover all the time. Who cares? Like I think this is something that they have to address. Both leagues have to address because there needs to be more parity. I mean, I don't know if the gamblers necessarily excuse themselves from not having that opportunity or the showbooks excuse themselves that much, but would I rather see them in there than the Maulers or the Panthers? Probably. I mean, I know I'm pulling straws at that point, but that, again, you should be rewarding the teams that have more wins. That's just how I feel.
Well, and to be fair, the CFL, the crossover doesn't really happen as much as I think that they really champion that you could, the whatever. We'll start to wind this down here. Looking forward, who has more work in the offseason here? Do you think getting ready for season 2 of the XFL or season 3 for the USFL?
That's a tough question.
Yep.
I'm gonna say the XFL just because, again, their potential, their ceiling, in my opinion, is higher. But that means also there has to be a lot more work. And, again, how many more players did they have to replace, too? Both leagues have to replace players and coaches. That's just going to happen. For the XFL, I think there's a lot of player development they still have to get underway. I mean, they're doing the showcases. They're trying to put in more effort, obviously, in terms of keeping people mentally conscious of their product. So I think they have a lot more work to do if they continue to see themselves as a full-fledged league. The USFL does as well, but the USFL is just, again, the concern with them is, all right, are you going to be continuing to do this hub thing? Are you going to continue having these brands in the same places? Are you going to just suddenly change the names and the teams and the cities all of a sudden? What's your strategy here? Why, and really evaluate why didn't more people watch this product this year versus last year? Really, that's their biggest question. The XFL, I think, knows that answer, and they understand why they underperformed. They know why they underperformed, as opposed to the USFL, who seems to be trying to figure it out and trying to understand why that happened. The XFL, I think, knows it. It's just a matter of them kind of pushing the right buttons in the right places. So they both have work, but it's different in terms of which question or which answers they have to supply.
I agree with that sentiment. I think if you, and obviously we're started this conversation with the Gerald Johnston and all of that, but yes, I think XFL goes, okay, we need more consistent time slots, more consistent days of the week. We need to get the guys into the stadiums more, hopefully have some better winning teams, right? I think if the Brahmas would have performed better, I think they would have been at least marginally more audience there. Same with Orlando. Okay, we need to kind of let's spend a little bit more. We've got the new hires, we're bringing in, we're going to kind of revamp all of that. I do think the USFL, honestly, and I'm trying to take, the Homer whatever out of this, is like, what do we do now? We've put 26 games on network. We've in 4 hubs now. Do we keep Canton, or do we rebrand that? But like, other than that, I think they did a lot this year, and that they did kind of everything. And I hope, and we will obviously know this next year, because I was having conversations as well. Like, we'll know with the XFL, right? We'll be able to compare season. We have nothing to compare right now. Maybe the XFL does everything next year, and it's anemic ratings, and it's still the same, and it flatlines. But if you're the USFL right now, I don't know what you do, because I don't think you're going to go, well, we got to put all the games on ABC or NBC and Fox, right? You're never going to do that. I don't know if 26 is topping out. Do you add a couple more? Does that make any difference? Do we try to do some more strategic lead-ins? Okay, then you're popping a couple ratings. I mean, the Preakness didn't really carry over at all, right? I mean, you got the 1-2 million rating. Like, I don't know, as opposed to, I think there's a lot more unknowns there. Position better, get better lead-ins, get more people, in the stands, try to do all that community building stuff. I mean, Memphis, roll with that. Maybe Michigan's better. I don't know. I don't know what USFL does. I think it's a more unknown.
Here's the thought. So one of the things that I don't think gets brought up enough with the USFL is they seem to ignore the West Coast market completely. The West Coast market is a complete anomaly to them. And if they're so focused on the Midwestern market, why not try putting yourself in some of these cities, some of these smaller cities that I've been told a million times desire to have a football team, Omaha, Nebraska, or Oklahoma City, or something of that nature, because I think that's the market that they fit better in, as opposed to the XFL, which is a little bit more spread out, but kind of has their established brands. They're on the East Coast, they're in the South, they're on the West. They're kind of more spread out. The USFL seems to have their contingency and their players, their brands. I think if I were them, I would just continue to focus on the Midwestern market, and kind of, if you're gonna, instead of it being all these different hubs and building out, maybe focus on it regionally and then start to expand out if you find the interest for it. So I think it's kind of like starting a franchise restaurant, right? Like, we're going to start in this area and we'll see where it goes after this. I would have argued that maybe that's what they should do instead, is really focus on the Midwest and, parts of the South, and kind of keep it that way, instead of trying to appeal to all these different hubs and being like, who wants a team? I've heard, again, over and over, where these teams should go, and where they should be. And I think for them, maybe that's the better play. I don't know if New Jersey's really gun-ho to get the Generals back. I don't know if Pittsburgh's gun-ho to get the Maulers back. I don't know if Philadelphia really wants the Stars back. These old brands. I don't know if they really care about it that much. And so instead of kind of appealing to those cities, those more peripheral cities where you're going to put your teams back in place, maybe you should just go after these markets that traditionally don't have as many teams around them, not as many competing interests, not as many things, quite frankly, things to do in those areas. I wonder if the USFL should just go that way, and the XFL could continue, going about their business or whatever they're going. But I think that is something that just occurred in my head, because I do think that the Midwest, I'd really have to get all the measurements of all the TV ratings and which, markets perform better than others. But to me, it feels like that's the region that cares more about it.
You also need to find markets that don't have as many gas stations having openings on 4th of July weekend or whatever.
Or Janet Jackson concerts.
Yeah, or Garth Brooks whatever down the street. Yeah, but just to round out the conversation, I do, as I said at the top, I think, and it was 50-50. I posted a Twitter poll, I think, a year ago, like, was the USFL better off? Just, like I said, we got the Maulers. Okay, we've decided now we're going to award that to a city. We're going to do that, because I think I think it's negligible. I mean, you could get the numbers of the TV demos and stuff, and Mike Mitchell had that, I think, with the USFL last year. Maybe that'll be coming out, kind of what markets perform better. But I think that way, then you're not, ceremoniously like, we're retiring the Tampa Bay Memphis, and then we're Tampa Bay Bandits, whatever. Like, I think then you're moving positives, right? Because right now, where you have these 8 named teams, anything obviously besides the team going to the city is considered a letdown. Whereas if you go the other way, it's all positive momentum. And hey, we have this team that we're sending them in here. You get a team, you get a team. But I think we'll wind this out today. I appreciate it. Anything else for you, Andy, before we get out of here?
Ultimately, I just want both leagues to figure it out. And I like having football year round. I think it's, for me as a junkie, it's been really interesting considering the momentum is not slowed down for me. I'm still looking forward to watching more CFL this weekend. I know that NFL training camps are just around the corner. It's really funny that all these people in my life are like, hey, football's back. I'm like, it never left. It doesn't leave ever. The lights don't turn off here. But I just want both leagues to really seriously look in the mirror and consider what they need to work on, and just, again, have more humility and understanding of where are you right now, and the fact that it's going to be a process. It's going to take a long time to figure this out. It took a long time for the MLS to get where it was right now. I feel like they want to be the MLS, but the MLS, they don't understand how much work was put into that in terms of just trying to build themselves up and all the franchises and the notoriety. Building a league is hard. If you haven't been around for 50 plus years, it's hard. It's going to be hard. You have to really be conscious of that going forward.
Yeah, and this relates, we have the same conversations about the CFL and things they can improve. And that league's been around, and we're going to have the 110th Grey Cup this year. And they're still, we just had on our live stream on Monday, the CFL or 3 Down had an article, ways the CFL leadership is failing its fans. And I mean, this is not a, unless you're the NFL and it's the be all end all, there's always things you can do to improve. And I think that all of these leagues, and I think the CFL would benefit from considering itself more alternative football. I understand it's not alternative football to the people that live in Canada, but to a large portion of the world it is. And I think the XFL and USFL, would do better to embrace Daryl Johnston's humbleness that I heard in this press conference and say, hey, build this with us, and not, we are pro football we are real football for real fans, because then I don't understand what that makes anybody else. I think that I understand that's marketing, but I still think that the backwardness of having that marketing all year and then have it come out and say, we don't know why our ratings are down. Very odd to me. Very, very odd to me. But we've talked about that enough. Andy, I appreciate it. We'll be back. We'll do everything else here coming up, but I'm sure we'll have more off-season content. So thanks again.
Always around, man. Take care.
Well, I appreciate this. It's been a long time coming. I've been corresponding with this gentleman. I appreciate it here, kind of holiday week and making my life easy and coming on. So I do appreciate that, because I'm like, God, I got weddings every day this week and trying to figure this out. That's what I do for my real life. So Dwayne Ford here, CFL on TSN. How are you doing, sir?
Excellent. Thank you for having me. I'm glad we were finally able to make it work.
It was good. Yeah, I was a little slow in getting my CFL draft stuff figured out this year, and by that point, it was a little too late. But we got it here. Dwayne, we're going into week 5 here. Except I have my BC Lions hat on. We did not have the greatest of Monday night. So, what have you made of the season so far?
Yeah, I think it's been exciting. I think that it has largely lived up to expectations in terms of some very good football games. Things are starting to shake out with teams establishing, I suppose, their pecking order, at least in the early part of the season. But as you know, we tend to divide the season into thirds in the world of the Canadian Football League and where people stand. So we're still sorting out this first third, and really still, when you look at BC, Winnipeg, Toronto, trying to figure out who's on top with the Argonauts, as you alluded to, making a pretty decent claim in recent weeks.
No, it was, I think, and we kind of we did it Tuesday this week, our kind of live reactions, post recap of the games. And, I call it the BC Lions America's CFL team. That's their branding I've given them. I was expecting maybe not 6 interceptions, thrown by Vernon Adams. Mm-hmm. What did you make? Because Argos came out and killed it anyway, but even with when it was near the end, 5 interceptions, only being down 11 points isn't the worst thing in the world.
Yeah, I think that because the story automatically becomes those 6 interceptions, I think that it overshadows some good things that BC did in the course of that football game, and referring to their offense specifically, that that they moved the ball, they made some plays, but the bottom line is ultimately the turnovers killed them. Toronto Argonauts they ultimately outplayed them by making big plays when they needed to make big plays, going and getting the football. And a lot of credit goes to their defensive coordinator, Corey Mace, a guy who I think has really established himself as one of the best in the business in his 2 years with the Toronto Argonauts.
It certainly seems as advertised here, coming off Grey Cup last year, and now we have Chad Kelly and everything else. Are you surprised? And it seems, I guess in a good way, we're really kind of trying to brand Chad Kelly now as the new, last year was a lot of the Nathan Rourke hype. And it feels like, we got Glenn Suter on there, and we're talking, we're all trying to get around Chad Kelly. Do you like that? Has he lived up to your expectations? And what do you make just of the storyline around him?
Yeah, he's exceeded my expectations, not in terms of sort of what his potential is or what I believed his potential to be, because this is obviously a guy who, as a football player, has a very impressive football resume. But just as a young quarterback in the Canadian Football League, historically, there's a learning curve that I don't necessarily want to call it a steep curve, but a curve that takes some time for guys to find their way. And so as a second-year player in the Canadian Football League, to be thrust into a starting position and to be thriving in this first third of the season, I think it reflects very well on Chad Kelly and on his future.
Well, you look here at another player who's had even longer here, where you look at Cornelius with the Elks, someone that, okay, we're getting them a couple years here, kind of expecting. We had the Jarrett Doege or Daggy show. I can never the Daggy show last week. Now we're back, presumably to Cornelius as we record this. I think Morley Scott had it out that he was taking the first trips. What do you make of? I don't want to call it a dumpster fire, but it's a little scary here in Edmonton.
Well, the lack of clear direction, and particularly at the most important position, is a concern. And I'm sure it's a concern for Chris Jones and offensive coordinator Stephen McAdoo as well, in that it was a question that you thought you had sort of answered a year ago when they had made a commitment to Taylor Cornelius. All along, I think that the struggle for Taylor has been in terms of his accuracy, and that was the limitation early on, the thing that they were looking to develop in him. Obviously, that's been kind of slow to develop. I think, though, when you look at the receivers they've brought in, trying to bring in big targets, guys who can go out and win 50-50 balls, when you consider especially Geno Lewis, Stephen Dunbar, that's been a lot of their game. I do think that a lot of that was designed to maybe erase some of the accuracy challenges that they would face at quarterback. But this is something they're going to need to figure a way to work around. It may take some tweaking with their offense to play a little bit more to Taylor Cornelius's strengths, and for him to buy into that. And what I mean is getting him on the move a little bit. The guy is a remarkable athlete, and I think catches a lot of people off guard at 6'5", 6'6", with his elusiveness and his ability to move. That I think you may have to build a little bit more of that into your play calling to get him into a comfort zone and maybe minimize the weaknesses, maximize the strengths.
It's hard. And, I watch like kind of the NFL and everything here too. And it feels a little bit kind of like a Daniel Jones with the Giants situation, where we have a guy like, we could kind of, but let's, is it, and I love Cornelius. We've tracked him all the way through the XFL back in 2020, and, he played down there. So, we've had this history with him, but is it worth to build that up? Or, we got Trey Ford sitting there, and I know Daggy looked better coming off the bench than he did kind of getting his start. But do you think Cornelius is the right decision there?
I think at this time, I think he's their most experienced option, and a guy that they've invested some time in. That, you know, you can put some practice time into developing the other guys, but I'm not sure that the other guys are ready to go through some of the ups and downs that are going to come along with this development curve in this early part of their careers. That you want to be careful with the younger quarterbacks. And I know that Taylor Cornelius still kind of falls into that category, but with more starts, more experience under his belt, I think he's probably better equipped to handle some of the ups and downs without it being damaging to his psyche and his long-term development than to throw the other guys in there at this point. You can continue developing them. And I think if you get to a point in the season, whether you say it's at the 1/3 mark, whether you say it's around Labor Day and mid-season, that you're going to give him to try and get going, or give one of the other guys to be more prepared to play. But I do think that Taylor Cornelius is the right choice for Edmonton right now. I think he's their best option for the time being.
It's just hard because, you know, we championed Tre Ford on here, and he was on the show kind of preseason and last year. And I mean, the best position in the world is to be that backup quarterback that everyone wants to see you, right, play. And, you know, I mean, he did, you know, he won in the preseason and all that. Any thoughts as Saskatchewan here with Trevor Harris and, you know, trying to kind of revamp after last year? He certainly seems to be doing better in that system than Cody was.
Yeah, I think when you look at Trevor, I think that Trevor is a guy who throughout his CFL career has been, for the most part, quite consistent, and a guy who is accurate, and a guy that gives you a chance to win. Right, he provides stability at the position, and when you relate it to the Edmonton situation, obviously that's what they're looking at is a veteran guy who provides you some of that. To the Saskatchewan situation specifically, in the move from Cody Fajardo to Trevor Harris, different guys, obviously. Cody providing some of that athleticism, mobility that isn't a big part of Trevor's game. Maybe Trevor would suggest an underrated part, and I know a part that he's worked on as his career has progressed. But overall, I think when you look at a healthy Trevor Harris, he's a guy that I think he's in a pretty good position. I think Trevor is poised for a good year. I think he's demonstrated that through the first few weeks of this season.
A lot of pressure on them, especially after last year and kind of missing the playoffs and everything else. Do you think that they've done enough? If they looked like they're going to be, we got Winnipeg here, BC, even with the Argonauts, is looking good here, in the West. We'll talk about Calgary, but I mean, is Saskatchewan doing enough?
Yeah, I mean, you await some of those measuring stick type games, right? Against, I think you would say Winnipeg, particularly in the West right now. BC still very much there. I think obviously disappointing performance for them in Toronto on Monday, but the fact is they're a very good football team. And so it does look like right now the road to success in the West Division kind of goes through those two teams. And that's taking nothing away from Calgary, who's always going to be competitive. But yeah, I think Saskatchewan, again, especially considering that it's early in the season, they've had some changes to their lineup, little bit younger at receiver with some injuries and so on there, an evolving offensive line as compared to last year, that there's some flux there. But in the early part of the season, I think they've shown pretty well, again, considering that it's this first third. We'll start to evaluate them a little bit more as we get to the middle part of the season, for sure.
Take notes. You don't consider Edmonton a measuring stick game.
Not yet. Not yet. And I'll never write anybody off in the Canadian Football League, especially early. And I'm certainly not going to count out Chris Jones as a coach. But yeah, obviously in the early part of the season, Edmonton has struggled, and they're trying to sort things out, and hopefully they will for the good of the league, for the good of that franchise.
How long of a leash do you feel like Chris Jones still has there? How hot is that seat getting?
I think that it's probably uncomfortable for him given his own expectations, and obviously externally as well, as everybody talks about the home losing streak and so on. And as I said, maybe that lack of clear direction, at least from our perspective, at the critical quarterback position, a little bit of the feeling that maybe they've made some some incorrect decisions when you look at the number of guys they've gone through. Obviously, it's been brought up in recent weeks that Chad Kelly is a guy who was their property, was on their neg list. They traded him away, and so his success while they struggle at that position is something that's not helping the case there. But I do think at the very least that Chris Jones' job is safe for this season unless the wheels completely come off, and we're honestly nowhere near that at this point.
Calgary here, obviously a team near and dear to your heart. We had Jake Mayer on last season, and I was kind of big. I said I want to kind of hitch my ride to you as kind of this new upstart, right? We're kind of moving. Well, I thought at the time moving on from Bo Levi, and here we'll talk Hamilton, but Calgary hasn't been great thus far. Competitive. What have you made? What's the storyline on Calgary? Yeah,
Calgary is we always think of Calgary as a reloading team and never a rebuilding team, but they are very much to me a team in transition more than they have been in some time, and that is signaled or headlined by the change at quarterback that occurred partway through last season. It's almost like in season you just move on as if Bo is injured, but it's still kind of the Bo era, and maybe in season rather than off season. Oddly enough, it may have been easier to make that move and have that transition. But one of the other things is this is another team that has been impacted by injuries on offense. And you look at the receiver position, you look at Kadeem Carey being out at running back. Obviously, they've got some depth there and a system that allows them to have some success in the run game. But playing with a lot of young receivers as well as a relatively new quarterback, preseason being what it has become in the Canadian Football League, where there are not a lot of reps for starters together, particularly at game speed, that a lot of these first few weeks of the season, quite frankly, are like extended training camp and extended preseason. And again, to emphasize, especially with that team playing with a lot of young receivers, that there are going to be some growing pains. They get a little bit of help with Reggie Begelton coming back off the 6-game injured list, and the re-signing of Markin Michel, who should be able to transition into that lineup fairly seamlessly. But when you look at the young guys that they've played with, and the young guys have played well, but they're still young guys playing in the Canadian Football League, playing professional football. And so I think that explains some of the Stamps challenges early on.
Yeah, it's hard. We've just gotten off of, with playoffs and everything, a 12-week XFL season and the USFL season. So, we fought, we kind of, even with our listeners and stuff, it's like, it's a marathon, not a sprint here. But, it's very much, I don't know. I'm in a very much live and die every week. So even though we are only going into week 5 here, it was, I was very close to have my BC Lions hat in the garbage here after the game on Monday. Calgary facing Winnipeg here, right, had their bounce back. BC kind of just kicked the snot out of them, and then they really held down Montreal there to just a field goal. Bounce back. Any cause for concern with Winnipeg?
No, I don't think there is. I think that Winnipeg is still one of the best teams in the Canadian Football League, and I'm very careful in saying that. As on our broadcast last week, I referred to Winnipeg as the measuring stick, the yardstick against which all other CFL teams kind of test where they are at this point. I don't want to ignore the defending Grey Cup champion Toronto Argonauts, who are demonstrating in the early part of this season that they deserve to be in that competition or in that conversation. But Winnipeg certainly remains one of those measuring sticks, I think, for everybody, sort of the model, the standard that everybody is chasing. They had a tough game against BC, but I think that they recognized what their challenges were, and they responded in a big way in terms of managing those challenges, overcoming them. Outplayed at the line of scrimmage, certainly in the BC game, but I think they more than answered the bell in that regard in the follow-up game against Montreal last week.
Because we've had conversations on here where maybe their defense is phasing out a little bit, or we've lost a couple too many. I mean, it'll get to the point that at some point it will get there. I mean, if we have a rematch again, and I don't want to discount my BC Lions, but if we see Winnipeg, Toronto here in the Grey Cup again, I mean, I would give Toronto at this point, and again, I know we're a ways away, quite the edge on that. I mean, just in how they've looked, but it's exciting to at least feel like there's a little bit more competition there. I don't know. Toronto is almost like too overpowered in the East now, where you have kind of them and then the rest of the world hanging out.
Yeah, I think everybody is. You started the season, it was wide open, right? And nobody really knew what to expect in the East because you had so many changes at quarterback. For one thing, you had Cody Fajardo coming off a tough year in Saskatchewan, so you weren't exactly sure how that was going to look in Montreal. Everybody debating what Bo Levi Mitchell has left as he moves to Hamilton. Chad Kelly, who had one late season start under his belt. So for all intents and purposes, a rookie starter in Toronto. They've had to deal with the Jeremiah Masoli injury lingering into this season in Ottawa. So uncertainty at quarterback, I think, created a lot of uncertainty in terms of how the division was going to unfold. But you do have to be impressed with what Toronto has done offensively. Chad Kelly, obviously a big part of that. A young offensive line that has really taken steps forward. When you look at having Ryan Hunter for the entire season, former first round pick, former NFLer, coming in partway through last year, late season, a nice addition for them. But now to get a training camp and really be prepared for the Canadian Football League season, very important guy. Peter Nicastro, the East Division Rookie of the Year a year earlier, misses all last year, but comes back in this year. And that's just a big boost to that offensive line as well. And as I said, I think that what Corey Mace is doing with that defense and some of the guys they've got over there, Winton McManus, typically the guy leading the way. I think Toronto is a force, certainly a force to be reckoned with, and the team that has stepped forward in terms of separating themselves in the East.
Talking here, Ottawa, we had the reports. I think it was AJ Jakubek had said yesterday as we recorded this, Masoli taking first team reps, and that's been the plan, right? And getting him, we've lived through the Tyree Adams and all of that. Is Masoli enough to kind of, Ottawa's had some wins here, not pretty wins, but they've had wins. Like, is that enough here? Masoli coming back to kind of write that? Because this is an exciting game to me. Obviously the Bo Levi and a lot of expectations with the Ticats here going into the season. What do you make of this Saturday game?
Yeah, I'm excited about it. I think it's you add some intrigue with Jeremiah Masoli making his return in Hamilton against his former team, and a Hamilton team that, as you alluded to, is still looking to answer questions at quarterback since he left. That that things haven't gone as smoothly as they thought. Obviously, the move to Dane Evans last year and on to Bo Levi Mitchell this year. Matthew Schultz taking the reins for the time being. When you talk about Masoli and his potential impact in Ottawa, I think it's significant because it's not just his presence. You're talking about a guy who not that long ago was a finalist for the league MOP, has battled injuries a lot since then, but a guy capable of playing at that level for one, but also his demeanor, I think, will bring a little bit of confidence to those around him. And you get a little bit more out of some of your receivers. I look at Jalen Acklin in particular, who is one of the most dynamic receivers in the league, but still trying to find his way as he adjusts to a new position in 2023. Masoli is the guy that knows him best. And I think is someone who can get a little bit more out of him, a little bit more out of Justin Hardy, who's become a bit of a fixture in that receiving corps, something of a go-to guy, a former NFLer who provides some veteran presence. So I look forward to seeing that group work together and the impact that just Masoli's veteran presence and poise have on the whole group that way.
It's sliding doors here. If Masoli never goes, the Ottawa, if Hamilton never deals him, and then we don't have the Garrett Marino hit, and then we don't have, a lot of things change from that. Are you overwhelmed, underwhelmed, or whelmed with Bo Levi Mitchell and everything happening with Hamilton right now?
Well, I would say underwhelmed so far, and that's a whole team thing. That's not just a Bo thing. Obviously, on paper, high expectations for Hamilton coming into the season with them hosting the Grey Cup, and they obviously recognize it, and clearly going out to get some pieces that they hope give them a chance to be in that Grey Cup before their window closes with some of their veteran guys. And, I think it's pretty clear that was the edict, but what looks good on paper doesn't necessarily work out great on the field. And that's not to say it won't. Again, it's not to keep going back to the idea that things take time, but in terms of finding their way and developing rapport, offensively in particular with a lot of new faces, there's been a struggle there. And it's not just the CFL veterans like Bo Levi Mitchell, James Butler, Duke Williams, and fitting those guys together, but they've had to start some young guys on the offensive line. When you look at the Montreal game, in which they had their hands full with what can be a pretty tenacious Alouettes front, that was a game in which Hamilton started 3 rookies on their offensive line, which is going to be a challenge for any team. And so as they straighten that out, that's obviously going to allow any quarterback to be in a better position to be successful, whether it's Matthew Schultz or Bo Levi Mitchell. But in terms of Bo moving to a new team and, new offensive coordinator, it's not like any of the receivers that are in Hamilton are guys that he had played with previously in Calgary. And I think that contributes to a lot of the growing pains there. But yeah, obviously a little bit of anxiety in Hamilton, given what they anticipated and given the way things have unfolded in the early part of the season for them.
If you had to give the edge for this one, Mazzoli coming back, is Hamilton coming off the bye as well, trying to figure that. Is Bo still out, right? Is it Schultz still?
I expect that it'll be Matthew Schultz again this week. Yeah. And I like Matthew Schultz as a quarterback. I think that he has a lot of tools to be successful in the Canadian Football League. But, as I said, it doesn't matter who's playing quarterback if you have a hard time keeping him standing upright or giving him time to do his thing. And, part of the question for Hamilton, I talked earlier about Edmonton and maybe doing some things in their offense to play to their strengths, and particularly play to the strengths of their quarterback. You may see a little bit of that kind of thinking in Hamilton as well, where if you're going to be a little bit younger, maybe not quite as strong on the offensive line, that, make sure you're getting your money's worth out of free agent signing James Butler at running back and give him the rock and take a little bit of heat off the QB and quite frankly, take a little bit of heat off your offensive line.
Last game here, we'll get out of here. I appreciate your time. Talking, BC, we need to bounce back here. I think Cody's looked good. I feel like he's a little more swole this year. I feel like he came in with, I don't know if he bulked up a little bit. What do you make? He's a friend of the show now. We had a little feud for a little while. We have our group chat is called Saison de Cody Fajardo. It's Cody Fajardo season. We're excited for him. What do you make of this Sunday night game here, or whatever, Montreal coming into BC?
Yeah, this is one where when you're Montreal, obviously Montreal would have spent a lot of time looking at BC on film and preparing for Winnipeg, and different sides of the ball, so to speak, in terms of who's looking at that film. But when you're that Montreal coaching staff, there's very much an awareness of the things that BC has done well to this point in the season, and recognizing what they struggled with against Winnipeg. And as I said, again, that's a lot at the line of scrimmage, that Winnipeg really kind of imposed their will at the line of scrimmage after having BC do that to them a week earlier. The Alouettes know what they're in for and kind of recognize that it's up to the guys on their fronts on both sides of the ball to step it up. I mean, the BC defensive line, led by Matthew Betts, has been very impressive, to say the least. A Montreal offensive line that was without Pierre-Olivier Lestage last week. They hopefully get him back this week, but the bottom line is a veteran group that has to do much like Winnipeg did against them, is answer the bell after a bit of an off outing.
Yeah, Matthew Betts had a sack on Chad Kelly that looked like a DDT. It looked like was that a pile driver or was that DDT? Really impressive there. I don't know. I felt we saw, at least in the first half of the Winnipeg Montreal game, it felt like, Cody, we're getting the ball moved enough. I mean, he's got a lot of targets there, and obviously Stanback's back, and he's healthy. Like you said, does he have enough time to kind of do any of that? But I don't know. I wasn't concerned as much with kind of the blowout loss against Winnipeg, because at least I felt like the Alouettes were doing something. Do you share similar sentiments, or how do you feel?
Yeah, it was an interesting one because when you look offensively, there were stretches for Montreal that were impressive and looked like they were going to get themselves back into that game. I thought particularly in the third quarter. And the issue that they had was turnovers that came at critical times, mistakes that came at critical times, because they got their running game going and got Stanback involved in that third quarter and were moving the ball. And I thought that was important for them. But then they had the fumble when they got into scoring territory. And and that was one that changed the game. And then they had the interception when, again, they're in scoring territory, but they moved the ball into that scoring territory. It's a matter of finishing. But when you look for positives to build on, I do think that there were positives there that, it's erasing those turnovers at critical times, right? It's, that's a big part of it. I look forward to the special teams battle in this game as well, and kind of, a couple of pretty good returners, Terry Williams in BC and Chandler Worthy in Montreal, and the difference that those guys might make in terms of field position in this ball game.
Yeah. Plus, even it was the rain delay last week. And sometimes I feel like with that, it kind of messes with your whole everything. And that game was so delayed. And then you're coming in. Were you at that game? Was that
I was. Yeah.
And so it's like, you come in and I don't know, we've had some, I watch a lot of baseball right now, and you kind of have the same thing. You're sitting around for 2 hours and then you got to go play. I don't know. I kind of feel like it's kind of a wash. But yeah, last things here, we'll get out of here. I appreciate it. BC what's impressed me is, obviously, you have the Keons back here and, Dominique and everything, but Lucky has been out, that Justin McGinnis, kind of stepping up. Like, there's just so many tools there for Vernon. I don't know. I felt like he got so rattled last week. I don't know. Yeah. I said on our show, it was almost like if you're at the casino and you've kind of lost a couple hands and you're like, well, I got to keep going here, as opposed to, I mean, I would have just ripped the Band-Aid and put Dana in just to kind of give some sense of, relief to Vernon. But do you think he can, not obviously in the game didn't bounce back, but this is kind of Vernon's life, right? It's kind of up and down, up and down. Like, do you think that there's enough here he can shake off?
Yeah, I do. I think having the opportunity to kind of step back and have a look at it when you're Vernon Adams, I think he'll see the exact thing that you said, is that he threw a couple of interceptions and then it was like trying to get it all back at once instead of just settling down and doing the things that have made him successful to this point in the year. And again, sometimes if you're not comfortable with what you see as a quarterback, particularly when you can move like Vernon, tuck that ball and run and, avoid the loss, turn it into a positive play. And so I think that he's matured a lot from his early days in the league where, this might have sent him into a little bit of a spiral that, that I do think that there's an opportunity to bounce back here for him. And I think that he's wired in a way that's what I expect of him.
Yeah, there was the one, I think it was the fifth interception where it's like, the guy's not even moving, went straight to the defender. It was well, Dwayne, I really appreciate it. Like I said, coming on, taking time on kind of the long holiday week and everything else. Really appreciate it. Excited for the season, and should be good games this weekend. We'll see bounce back, and like you said, with Hamilton and everything else. So really appreciate your time.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure. Look forward to doing it again soon.
Huge special thanks to all of our guests today. Like I said, Dwayne Ford taking the time, making my life incredibly easy here on the holiday weekend, taking the time, coming on, talking through all of the CFL teams and kind of how they're standing, how Dwayne kind of sees the CFL landscape right now in the first third of the season. Thanks again to Andrew Buckholtz coming on from Awful Announcing, taking the time, breaking down all of the numbers. And then, of course, Andrew Murray, long-ranging conversation with him. I really appreciate that. That will do it for me today. Short and sweet here. 3 grass should be fun. Stick tuned. Hussey and I will be back, Jason, on Monday. We'll be talking all of the games for the CFL over the weekend. Hopefully the BC Lions celebrating the victory here against the Montreal Alouettes. Thanks as always for your support. Like and subscribe. We'll see you next time. And keep in mind now, we didn't hit the 3,500 subscribers through the USFL season. So now get your chance, get an XFL or USFL season kickoff ticket, kickoff opening weekend, whatever you want to say. You can do it for the inaugural game. You can do it for one of the other games of the weekend. But like and subscribe, get us up to 3,500 subscribers, and we'll be giving away tickets to that here. Hopefully, we'll see. We do this every week. If you're new, if you're old, but stick around. Lots of giveaways, other things. I still have some spring league practice jerseys I need to give out at some point as well. So appreciate it as always. We'll see you next time. Thanks.